Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to be making a miniature sink for this little kitchen that's going into my doll's house. So in the last few videos I've been making the cabinets and this little worktop, and I left space for the sink, as you can see. So I started by gathering together all of my resources, and I'm going to be using air dry clay for this project. This is my clay rolling pin. You can see that it's been used for other projects, and because I don't want any of this terracotta clay to transfer onto my white clay, I am going to use a piece of greaseproof paper in between the clay and the rolling pin. I could just wash the rolling pin, but then it's going to take time to dry, and I wanted to get straight on with my project. And I'm working on a glass tray just because I know that it won't stick to the tray, and this tray is only ever used for clay work, so I use it for my polymer clay as well. It's never used for food. Now, I was in the charity shop the other day and I found these little clay tools, and I thought these are perfect. I've been meaning to buy something like this for quite a long time. So every time I use polymer clay, I think to myself, I really wish I had a little tool to cut through this more easily, and I just saw these on the shelf and thought they were perfect. There was actually some polymer clay in the charity shop as well, and I've been back recently and it's still there, and I keep thinking, should I buy it? But I do actually already have quite a lot of polymer clay, so I left it thinking somebody else will buy that and really enjoy using it, but it's still there. Anyway, I keep thinking about it. So I wasn't sure whether this little rubber piece was to protect the end that has the blade to make sure that you don't hurt yourself when it's stored away, or whether it's to be used as a little handle. Or maybe it's both. Maybe I meant to transfer it from one side to the other when you finished. It is actually a little bit loose, but I decided to pop it over as a little cover so that I could use it as a handle whilst I was pushing the tool into the clay. I couldn't believe how much easier it was to cut the clay with this tool. It just shows that having the right tools for the job really makes a huge difference. Now, I sealed the end up and I wanted to put it into a tub which is airtight, just to make sure that I was preserving this clay for using it in the future. However, as you can see, the tub was far too small. So later on, I cut this block of clay in half, so half of it's still wrapped in its packaging and half of it isn't. I have used this tub for clay before, without any packaging at all, so hopefully it will keep the clay so that it doesn't dry out before I use it next time, because obviously I'm only using a really tiny piece for this project. Now, I'd searched the house for something that I could use as a little mould for the shape of the sink. So I'd looked through my cupboards, I'd looked everywhere, just for something that would be the right shape. Ideally, I could have done with one of those little pots that tomato sauce comes in from a famous fast food place, but I didn't have one. So I found a little perfume bottle and I thought that this was the closest that I would come to the correct shape and size. When I was rolling on my little glass tray, it was making the imprint from the tray, from the pattern on the base of it. I turned my tray upside down because it's got a little edge around it, so I couldn't actually get the rolling pin inside the tray when it was the correct way around. So I put the clay inside the greaseproof paper. I kind of folded the greaseproof paper around it, and this stopped the imprint from rubbing into the clay. I also put 2 pieces of wood which were the same thickness on either side, so that as I rolled, this meant that the piece of clay was rolled out completely evenly across the whole surface. Then I moulded the clay around this little perfume bottle. At this point I wasn't sure if the clay would stick to the bottle. I hadn't put anything over the bottle to stop it from sticking, but I thought I'll just have a try and see what happens. This is where the sink was going to be positioned, and I decided to trim the edge at this stage to make it nice and neat, and then I knew that when it was dry I could probably file it down a little bit to make it even smoother. I'd also found some little press studs in the same charity shop that I bought the clay cutting tools from. These ones here. And as soon as I saw them, I thought they look like little plugs for the kitchen sink. So I decided to cut a little hole out of the clay in the bottom whilst it was still wet, and this would make the little plug for the sink. To cut out the plug, I used the casing of a pen, and it was just the right size. So whilst the clay was drying, I decided to move on to finishing off a project that I'd started a few videos ago. And I didn't finish it because basically I'd made 6 miniature baskets, but 2 of them weren't finished off at the bottom here because I ran out of the thread. And I had some of this thread, which was a slightly different colour. So thank you so much to everybody that commented on the video with suggestions of what they thought I should do. So I decided to try and paint this thread, and I wasn't sure if this would work because the thread is waxed, so it has a wax coating on it, and I didn't know if the paint would stick. But I thought I would give it a try. So I was using acrylic paint. I think the colour was burnt sienna. And the paint seemed to be applying really nicely. Didn't seem to matter that I was painting onto waxed thread, and the colour looked perfect. So thank you to everybody that suggested trying to paint the thread. If this hadn't have worked, I was going to try and stain it with some teak oil that I used on the flooring of my doll's house, but I wasn't sure if this would have dried, so I thought I'd try this way first. And I'm glad I did, because it worked. So when it was dry, I glued it in place. When I'd made these miniature baskets, it was before I'd bought this Yoo-hoo glue with the small nozzle, and I'd really found it difficult to apply the glue neatly. So it was interesting to use the glue that I'd now bought with the bottle with the nozzle to compare the difference. It was so much easier. So much easier to attach these neatly. So this was then finished and ready to go into the doll's house. So I know that there is a slight difference in colour, but it looks more obvious on camera actually. In real life they look almost the same colour. So I just adjusted the thread a little bit whilst the glue was still wet, and when it was dry I popped them into the doll's house. When this clay was dry, it was time to start working on the little area where I was going to slot it into the worktop. So I made the worktop in a previous video. I will link it to this one so that you can watch it if you've not watched it already. I do have a whole playlist where I save every step of the makeover. In fact, I'll pop the link to that at the top, and then anybody who's new to my channel can catch up if they'd like to. So this looks like a really precise mathematical drawing, doesn't it? But it's not. Basically, I'd worked out the centre point of where the cupboards were, then changed my mind, then worked out the centre point of where one cupboard was, and then I just thought I'm just going to draw around the sink that I've already made because it's not actually a perfect rectangle, so yeah, it's not very precise. As I'm watching this back, I've noticed how close my left hand is to the Stanley knife that I was using to cut the wood, so please don't copy my techniques. I do try and work really carefully, but watching that footage back there, I realised I should have turned the piece of wood around so that I was holding the bigger end. But yeah, please don't copy my techniques because I'm not a professional. I'm just doing this as a hobby. So I was using this little file which has a curved edge and also a flat edge just to try and neaten out this little section. And I decided to actually remove the sink at this point. It was almost dry, but it wasn't completely dry, but it would hold its shape, and I thought that this might be helpful just to check my measurements. And when I held this to it, I realised that I'd cut a gap that was just a little bit too big. So I decided that because the worktop wasn't covering the edge of the sink, I wanted to try and make it like an undermount sink, but the worktop wasn't completely covering every edge. I decided to make it so that this would fit perfectly into the gap, so you would be able to see the edge of the sink. So I was kind of making it up as I was going along. I wasn't sure at this point if it would stay as an undermount sink. I was still considering that I might make it as an inset sink, where it has a little draining board attached to it. I'd painted this little sink white, but when I held it up against the worktop, I didn't feel like it looked right. So I decided to cut away a little bit at the worktop to try and make this gap a little bit more rectangular. At this stage, I wasn't pleased with how the sink was looking. It just didn't look right. I felt like the shape wasn't quite right, and it wasn't really fitting the industrial theme that I'd wanted. Whilst I've been looking for a bit of inspiration for my own kitchen in my house, I had seen a copper sink, so I wondered whether I could use some of this paper that I'd used when I was experimenting with different types of worktop to line this sink to make it a little copper sink. I wasn't really sure how I could attach this foil and do it neatly. I tried cutting into the corners to see if I could fold the foil inside, but this didn't really work. Next, I tried cutting out smaller pieces of foil to see if I could sort of decoupage them into the sink. Is that the word? I'm not sure. But I didn't like how they were overlapping. I didn't think that this looked very neat either. But I had a different idea. So I've been watching some nail art videos online. I've never had my nails sort of professionally done before, and I don't use UV nail polish for my nails because, as I explained in the last video, I'm actually really wary of the UV lamp. But I've been watching these videos, and on these videos, people were painting nails with the UV gel nail polish, and over the top coat they were rubbing in this powder, and it was making their nails look as if they were metallic. So I bought some of this powder because I wanted to try it out to see if I could make objects look shiny when I'm making miniatures. Now, please don't copy this, because obviously this powder and the nail varnish and the UV lamp are all made for using on nails and not for using on the materials that I'm using them with. And so, because I don't know if any risks are involved with combining these different materials, please don't copy me. In the last video, I explained that when I'm using my UV lamp to cure the gel polish, I'm also putting some extra things in place to try and make it a little bit safer for me, but I don't know if they're the right things to do or the safest things to do. So this is not a tutorial, please don't copy me. It's just a diary entry as I'm experimenting with making miniatures. So yeah, I applied the UV top coat to this sink. Once the nail varnish had been cured underneath the UV light, I just applied the tiniest bit of this powder and started to rub it in to the painted surface. There were a few small areas where this powder didn't really stick, but I think maybe they're areas that I've missed with the gel polish. So you can see just in the corner at the top right there. So I did go back after this and add a little bit more of the UV top coat, and then I filled in those areas. I couldn't believe how much it looked like metal. The only thing was that it had a little bit of a holographic effect, and so in certain light the metal was shining as if it was sort of in rainbow colours. I tried putting some of the powder on the outside where there wasn't any UV polish to see if this would just work on any surface, but it didn't attach at all, so I don't know what was happening to make the powder attach to the cured UV gel. I don't know what science there is behind that, but yeah, it definitely looked like metal. If anything, it was actually a little bit too shiny, and I wanted it to look like the metal was a little bit tarnished. I wasn't really sure how to achieve that look, so I decided to glue it in place because at this point I thought this was probably going to be my finished sink. But when it was in place, I still wasn't happy with it. And I wondered what the metallic powder actually was, and I thought about the fact that it was very similar in consistency to eyeshadow. So I wondered whether I could actually apply some eyeshadow to this and if it would work in the same way. Now obviously this is eyeshadow that I never use for makeup, I just use it for crafting because I found it to be really useful for things like using on clay, and I used it on the miniature worktop in my previous video. So I tried rubbing it in and I did find that it dulled the metal down a little bit. Once I'd finished, I popped the little plug in place and then I attached this worktop to the kitchen cabinets. I'm not gluing this plug in place yet because I've still got to make the tap, and if the tap is a different colour, I'm going to try and make the little plug match the tap, so we'll see. I'm going to do that in the next video. The next morning I had a little look. Now, I wasn't 100% happy with how the sink was looking, especially because the edge wasn't sort of perfectly straight, and I didn't think that it made the statement that I needed this sink to make. So I wondered whether I could make a little draining board and also a little edge to go around the sink to make it look like an inset sink. I had this piece of, I don't know what to call it, it's not card, it's bendy, and it's magnetic, so it's like a magnetic sheet, and it's just been sat in my craft box probably for about 2 years. And I also had this piece of packaging from a really yummy cake that I'd had, and I wondered whether I could use these materials to make the draining board. I liked the fact that I was using materials that I already had instead of buying anything new, and I felt like this piece of packaging had some really good sort of ridges in that would look good as a little draining board. For cutting a rectangle out of the magnetic sheet, I needed to know what space to leave, so I just used this leftover bit of packaging to use as a template because it was transparent, and I laid it on top of the magnetic sheet, and then I just made sure that the hole that I cut out was a little bit smaller than the template so that the edges would overlap over the sink just to neaten off the sides so that they weren't as wobbly. At this stage I thought about where the tap was going to go because it either needed to go into the sort of surrounding of the sink or into the worktop. So I actually decided to cut out a tiny little curved space here so that the tap would be half in the metal sink and half in the worktop to look like it was purposefully placed there. I'd found this little hole punch in my toolbox and thought I've never used this before, and then when I was doing this I thought this would be perfect for making sure that the shape is sort of an accurate semicircle. So I lined the centre of this hole punch up with the grid on my cutting mat and I made a little mark on the piece of magnetic sheet and I tried to cut a semicircle out. Thankfully it did cut in the correct position. So that was where my tap was going to go, which I'll be making in the next video. Now it was time to try and make this look like it was made out of the same material as the sink. So I painted it with top coat. Now obviously I was painting the top coat over a black surface and a transparent surface. And I wasn't sure whether it was going to look the same because the sink had obviously been painted with white acrylic paint. When these surfaces had cured, it was time to add the powder. In certain lights you could really see this shining green, but actually when it's laid flat on the worktop, it doesn't shine like that. Because I didn't really want a green sink. It looks like a rainbow disco sink. Again, I tried to make this metallic effect look a little bit tarnished with the black eyeshadow. You could really tell the difference when applying this metallic powder over the transparent material. But it wasn't too much of a problem because when this was laid over the magnetic sheet, it kind of disguised the fact that it was transparent. I decided to trim the corners to make it curved, but straight away I wasn't really happy with the shape of it. And whilst I was doing this, I realised that some of the black eyeshadow was rubbing off. So I decided to do an experiment to see if I added another layer of top coat and then the eyeshadow, would the eyeshadow stay in place? So I rubbed off the eyeshadow and did a little experiment, and I found that this worked. So I added a little bit more top coat to these surfaces so that I could just add a little bit of the black eyeshadow just to make this metal surface a little bit more tarnished so that it matched the sink. Seeing as I'd realised that it worked with the black eyeshadow, I decided that I could actually add some of the other colours as well. I still didn't like the curved edges at the back, so I decided to trim this down a little bit so that the plastic part of this draining board finished at the same point as the magnetic sheet underneath. Then I glued the two pieces together. Even though I didn't really like the curve of the draining board earlier, I decided to just trim a tiny little piece off each corner because I just thought that it would make the shape look more finished off. Before the glue had fully dried, I laid this into its correct position and just moved the little plastic piece slightly to make sure that it was sat perfectly. And once the two pieces had dried, it was time to attach them to the worktop. I was so much happier with how this was looking now that there was a draining board in place. I thought that it made much more of a statement, and I liked the fact that the colour really matched the little handles that I'd added to the cupboard doors. I am still slightly concerned about using the UV nail polish, the UV lamp and the powder with the surfaces that I'm putting them on, because I don't know about the chemicals involved and how they react with each other. So if anybody has any advice or information about that, so I don't know if anybody is sort of a professional nail artist or anything like that and knows more about the materials that I'm using, please do let me know in the comments, because I do always want to do everything in the safest way possible. So as I say, please don't copy anything that I've done in this video, because whilst I'm really happy with the outcome, I am still a little bit nervous about the materials that I've been using together, just in case there's a reason not to use them together. But yeah. Thank you so much for watching. I am really happy with the outcome now. I think it makes the worktop look a little bit better because it gives it a bit more of that industrial look, because at the end of the last video I wasn't sure whether I should have actually done a concrete worktop instead. I forgot to paint the sink underneath, and this part here of the worktop still has a gap between the worktop and the cupboards, but all in all I think that it's starting to take shape. I'm not sure what to do about this gap here. Yeah, So thanks so much for watching. Please leave a comment to let me know what you think. And in the next video, I'm going to be making the little miniature tap that will go into the space where I punched a hole in the draining board. And I also want to pop a chopping board here and a microwave and kettle here. As I make each accessory, I will document it in a video and I'll pop it into the playlist. So please do subscribe to the playlist if you've enjoyed the video. I'm looking forward to making the miniature fridge, although I have accidentally made the worktop a little bit too big on the right edge there. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!